Hey, Bian, I found the most amazing thing to treat poison ivy with.
What are you going to tell me, like peanut butter or something like that?
No, no, way grosser. Preparation H. So listen, poison ivy is a real problem for us home inspectors. It's always like the vacant house and there's like all these plants. All of a sudden you're covered in it. So I went and got a tube and put it on my poison ivy, and it is amazing.
I just, I'm imagining this guy running into like a drugstore and buying, buying like 3 or 4 things of preparation H with all these red blotches all over his skin.
The pharmacist is like, "Whoa, hold up, buddy."
I think you got the wrong idea, but
I'm like, "Wait, you haven't met me yet. You haven't met my personality. This goes exactly where you think it does." But no, I was actually using some other stuff for years, and I'm highly allergic to it. I almost died from it when I was like 19. So when I get it, it gets really bad, and nothing ever works on me. And so I was looking, and I'm like, you know what? Preparation H is for swelling and for itchiness.
there you
And
go.
I'm like, huh. So I did a bunch of research on the chemicals in it, and it's been the best relief for poison ivy that I've ever had in my entire life. So there you go, everybody. If you're inspecting houses and you get poison ivy this year, especially in the Northeast where it's been dry, congratulations. Grab a tube of Preparation H. I am not giving you medical advice. Check with your doctor beforehand before you rub it all over you. I imagine if you use it everywhere, I think there's a chemical in it. Man, this is really diverging. But check with a doctor. I don't know. But it worked really well for me.
Good
Anyways,
story. Good
how are
story.
you?
Yeah,
How
the
are you
worst
doing,
case.
Bian?
No, I'm doing okay. But yeah, while we were talking about poison ivy, I think the worst case of poison ivy I ever saw was this one friend of ours. He had a tree. He was a hunter, so he had a tree stand, and he knew there was poison ivy on the tree, so he was always careful to climb around it. But he was climbing out of his tree stand the one day, and he slipped, and all he could do was like hug the tree trunk as he was sliding down. And he got poison ivy literally everywhere down his entire body.
Oh,
Yeah, it was not good.
well, the reason I bring this up because it's a nice segue into the rest of our podcast because we need preparation
H
for what's happening in the market now.
because it's hurting a lot of people out there. We
The
need
market is
something.
swelling and it's itchy. But no, it's good to have you back on. We're this is going to be basically our it's not our market outlook podcast. It's basically the state. It's like the state of the market, what's going on out there, because there's been so much going on. Here at ITB, we've been pumping out new features, new design elements in our app, all sorts of great stuff. But in the market as a whole, it's just been crazy. So we thought it would be a really good idea to kind of update on what's going on out there.
Mm.
Especially as of the recording of this podcast, it was only a few days ago where everybody was screaming, market crash, stock market crash, because there
Mm-hmm.
was one bad jobs report. I remember everybody's emailing me and messaging me, pull all your money out. I'm like, just wait, give it
Mm-hmm.
a couple of days. My brother's a CPA. He's like, just give it a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
You need more bad job reports than that. And it came back for the most part as of the recording of this podcast. This podcast will probably not go out for another week or maybe even two. But there's just a lot going on. There's that. There's also the fallout from the NAR lawsuit, which is happening on August 15th.
Mm-hmm.
They got some things extended and pushed out. And just overall, what's happening? Is there anything in particular you wanted to start off with, Bian?
No, nothing in particular, but yeah, everybody was kind of freaking out a few days ago when the stock market jumped down. It was interesting. I learned something about how the uh, what do they call it again? But it's something to do with the Japanese Nikkei index with the yen. I
Yeah.
guess it's cheaper to borrow money. But anyway, so their market reacted first because I was sometimes I'm up late at night, I can't sleep, so I was just looking at the markets, and all of a sudden I looked and I was like, whoa, Japan is down. It was down 10%, and of
Oof.
course our markets are closed, and then they closed 10%. So the next morning, that's when the U.S. markets just freaked out, and they were reacting to the U.S. fears of U.S. recession, and it all kind of played together. But it was generally accepted as an overreaction. So markets have rebounded, and things are looking a little better.
Yeah, and you know what? There may be a recession. We're actually overdue for one. Some people say we could have had a recession, and we've said this before on the podcast, but a real recession kind of takes about 18 to 24 months to get out of, and we haven't really experienced that.
Mhm.
As a home inspection company owner, as a home inspector myself, I want the recession.
Hmm.
It's going to reset the market. It's going to create inventory. It's going to do a lot of things for us. Interesting factoid, only 30 some odd percent, about 33% of buyers were first time home buyers on the market.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's according to NerdWallet. And so I went and checked the National Association of Realtors website, and they actually said it was 31%
Mhm.
were first time home buyers.
Mhm.
So it's about the same.
What is the
That's
percentage usually? Like, what has it traditionally been? Higher or lower?
higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Basically, they're using it as a number to show that the market is pushing first time home buyers out of the market.
Okay.
And we as home inspectors, especially new guys, that's where we bust in.
Mhm.
So if somebody bought a house 10 years ago and they use me as the home inspector,
Mhm.
I have a good 80% chance that they're going to hire me again.
Right.
Especially if you have a good marketing campaign. So I get that recurring work all
Mhm.
the time.
Mhm.
So that recurring work, those new guys don't even get a chance at.
Right.
So if we're a newer home inspector, that especially hurts us not
Mhm.
having the first time home buyer.
Mhm.
So we count on the lower percentage of second or third home buyers not having their inspector around anymore. Maybe he retired, maybe he moved, maybe went out of business, but that's still a lower percentage
Mhm.
and a lower chance. Usually they're referring out and things like that.
Mhm.
It's a big complex web, but in short, less first time home buyers on the market is not good for most new home inspectors.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And that also means there's generally speaking going to be a higher percentage of investor buyers too.
Mm.
They tend to push the first time home buyers out of the market. The percentage that was presented on some websites, and it was really hard to, so I don't want to present it as a hard number, but it was 50% or more would typically be what some websites presented as, hey, this year it was 50 some odd percent or more, sometimes a little less. All I know is they're saying it's a low percentage of first time home buyers
Okay.
in the US anyways,
Yeah.
which makes sense. Higher
Yeah.
house prices pushing first time home buyers out.
Yeah.
So that
Higher,
does affect
higher,
our industry.
higher interest rates too. Obviously, have been a big issue. That I guess now we're lower than what we've been in a while. So some guys are optimistic that we may see a bit of a trickle with some folks that have been waiting out, possibly considering getting back in, or I guess it doesn't affect home inspectors, but guys who did get out a mortgage when it was at its peak are now considering refinancing to get a lower interest rate. So yeah, that won't maybe necessarily affect home inspector business, but maybe instead of seeing a fall lull like we usually do, it could maybe sustain us through. What do you think?
Well, I have to disagree with a couple of things that you said there. I think people who had the peak rates already went for the lower rates when they were like 2.9 and 3.1%. I think that phase is mostly done. I think there are some trickle effects of that. I don't think there's going to be a fall lull.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. Usually there's going to be a lull at the end of August and most of September. School season starts. That's just,
Mm-hmm.
families buy homes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also think there's going to be a lot of people buying houses that don't have mortgages anymore. So I don't think the mortgage rates are going to matter as much.
Okay.
Because if you think about let's say, take that lower number, 31% of home buyers are first time home buyers. That
Mm-hmm.
means hypothetically 69% of home buyers need little or no mortgage, because that means they're selling a home.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're selling a home for $700,000 and you're
Mm-hmm.
downsizing to a $400,000 home, you
Mm-hmm.
don't need a mortgage. Or even if you're upgrading a little bit, you don't need much of a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be some good things for us in that. I do worry about the number of investors in the market because that does scare me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like flippers. I know most of us don't like flippers. It's not a great inspection market to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But usually October and November, right up to Thanksgiving, usually the week before Thanksgiving, that's a 6 to 7 week period of our busiest time of the year.
Okay.
Spring is obviously the busiest. Summer is second, but sometimes that 6 to 7 week period in the fall time can be, as a whole, the U.S. and Canada, our busiest time for home inspections. People trying to get it all done before the holidays, and then we go through the invariable. December, we're too busy with our families and holidays to pay attention, pick up a few inspections before Christmas. Then January and February, we all think we're going out of business. We all freak out. I get a million emails, try to tell everybody we're not going out of business. Then by March and April, everybody's like, hey, I'm back in business again. Happens every year. But this year, like we said at the beginning, this isn't a banner year. It's not going to be our biggest year. Something that has a bearing on the market and what we're doing is NAR.
Okay.
The NAR settlement. We're actually starting to see that. Have you heard anything about that, Beyond?
I haven't actually. Since the last time we spoke about it, I've kind of not been looking at what's going on there. So August 15th, you said it was some of the stuff comes in effect, huh?
Yeah, and there's a lot of moving parts. It was supposed to be July, but then how they worded some things and some changes and yada, yada, yada. But the NAR changes really happen on August 15th, probably around the time that we'll release this podcast.
Okay.
Here's some things that are going to make this change. Remember, everyone, though, this is not a law. This isn't a law that was put in place. This was a settlement for the nation's largest association of realtors. So it's not a law. And we could have done all of this before the settlement, and you can still do it the old way afterwards. It's just that if you're a NAR agent, if you say you're a realtor, you cannot do this. You can't write it into your contract. But they're gonna, starting August 15th, you can't roll the commission in to one big percentage. So you can't have the seller's agent negotiate that. So it's kind of interesting. Buyers won't necessarily pay out of pocket, though. And I said this on one of our previous podcasts. This is changing our industry. Not as much as I had hoped, though. And I'll tell an anecdote here in a minute. But the money can come directly. There's 4 ways that they can go about it. The money can come directly out of the seller's pocket. The money can come directly out of the buyer's pocket, which is the unlikely one. Third, the buyer and seller may split the payment. That's still unlikely. Fourth, the buyer may pay indirectly by adding their agent's commission to the price of the house when they make an offer. So it's a buyer's credit, a credit at closing, however your area terms it. So here's an example of how an indirect payment might work for a buyer who is paying a 3% commission. So the buyer finds a house costing $400,000. The 3% commission is $12,000. The buyer offers $412,000 and asks the seller to transfer $12,000 to the buyer's agent at closing.
Okay. So it's basically the exact same thing that's happening now, but it'll be transparent and actually itemized as opposed to this mystery deal that was happening in the background.
Yep.
Okay.
That is going to be the most likely one, in my opinion. So interestingly, we are selling a building, and the seller's agent, they're not saying anything, and all of a sudden we get the contract, and I'm reading through it line by line by line, and I'm like, wait a second, it says in here that we're going to pay the buyer's commission in addition to the seller's commission. We pay the seller's commission and have a contract with them to split it, but they're like, well, we can't split it anymore. I'm like, well, I'm not going to give you 6% and then pay 3%.
Oh, they were still asking for the first. So, yeah, you see, that just shows some of the delusion out there in the industry right now. I'm sorry, I won't get on that horse, but man, oh man, really? We're going to just take the full 6% now?
They're like, I did my job. I'm like, well, okay, that's not what our contract says.
That is nuts. And to someone who's misses the other lines, that just looks like normal. Yeah, well, it's normally 6%, so here you go.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
And then, so it's like, all right, we're going to need a new contract or something. Because, listen, I don't mind doing the credit at closing. It's like, okay, they're going to pay me 412 and then I pay them 12 back or whatever. That's fine. But I have no standing with their agent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So from a legal standpoint, I'm not going to pay them. They
No.
want me to pay the buyer's agent directly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, of all the scenarios that could have happened in here, you choose the one that doesn't make that makes the least sense.
Pretty gutsy move. I think it shows some of the psychology that is exactly being the problem in the industry.
Yeah, it really has. And she's a decent agent. Not great. Like, I kind of worried. I'm like, is she worth that 3%? I'm kind of doing a lot of work here, you know? But now she's like, you know what? I want all 6%. And you have to pay the buyer's agent.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I think, though, in reality, besides her delusion, was that the buyer's agent needed commission, but he can't get it out of the seller's agent.
Mm.
So the buyer's agent or the buyer was just like, I'm not going to pay you directly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the buyer's agent was asking for commission from us, the seller.
Yep.
Because everybody's doing it. And that was one of the problems we talked about before. Everybody's doing it different.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a different idea of what should go down. So now there's no cohesion in the real estate industry. So every deal is going to be a snowflake, completely different than the other one. So
it'll probably settle into a pattern of normal practice, after a little bit. But you're gonna have some interesting moments here. Because I mean, you're a pretty savvy seller, right? So you're able to pick that up. You dialed into the situation, but there's a lot of people that are not, and it's going to lead to some fun times ahead. I can see for some.
Well, and so here's how I think that affects our industry. I already know personally agents that are leaving the real estate industry. So I love real estate agents. Some of the smartest people I know are real estate agents, but I also know some of the people that are the least smart people that are real estate agents. So I'm trying to find a nice way to say this.
If you're a real estate agent and you're a friend of Ian's, you get to decide which group you fall into.
Yeah, which group you fall in.
Whichever one makes you feel better.
Yeah, but I honestly believe that. But this is going to cull the herd of the agents that are less savvy and less in tune with things, of how to make it work. Because already I'm seeing agents that are kind of bumbling around in the industry, but for some reason they'd find other agents that would carry their load, and they're like, oh, this somehow magically worked out and I have money on the table. Now they're like, what do I do? And they're just walking around their offices. What do I do? What do I do? And everybody's like, just read this, do this. And they're like, that sounds complicated. Those agents are already leaving. And those are the agents that always made business hard for me. I love the agents that we work with. Highly intelligent. They're like, I get what you're saying. What about this? Easy to work with. Ones who can't change their own socks are the ones that make our profession hard to do. The ones that call us, they're like, you called out the bathroom sink. What's wrong with it? It's in the report. You expect me to read your report to understand what you called out? Yes. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time helping those people because we run a business and we want to be polite and loving and kind. I'm okay with that culling the herd.
Yeah. And it seems the sentiment is the same even within the real estate agent community. Because I remember leading up to that lawsuit settlement, I was trolling quite a few of the forums, for realtors and agents. We should say probably more broader, but that was the sentiment as well, as they themselves were upset about bottom feeder agents, that were giving the industry a bad name, who show up at the last minute in their flip-flops to sign some paperwork and they walk away with half of the commission. So it seems like, it is offering a reset even from their perspective. So,
but this is how it affects us. Those, as you put it, bottom feeder agents, those agents that show up in flip-flops. My favorite one is we're doing $1 million home 15 years ago, so it was a bigger deal back then. She shows up in her gardening clothes, and I'm like, you want to follow around? She goes, no, I don't care. And I'm like, she's like, my buyer's not here. I'm just here to open the door. And she just sat there and played Candy Crush on her iPad or whatever it was. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. But the problem is, if we rely heavily on real estate agent referrals, we're going to lose a lot of real estate agent referrals.
That's true. Because that comes from the buyer end, right? Yeah.
Yep. So now the pool of referrals gets a lot smaller, a lot smaller. So doing more direct to agent or direct to consumer marketing is still the best way to do it, in my opinion. You got ChatGPT coming out with its own search engine. Google ads are for some reason making a resurgence. Google local service ads are doing fantastic. Those kind of things are going to allow us to expand our marketing base rather than going with realtors. Interestingly, Home Inspector, we just built him a website, and he's like, Ian, I never really had a need for a website. Then all of a sudden, half my agents left the industry and 3 of them died. He goes, I've been doing this for 20 years. And he's like, now all of a sudden they're gone. And I'm like, and he's like, Mike, now people are like, what's your website? And I'm like, oh, I don't have one. He's like, and I tried to do something myself, it's just an anecdotal way of saying it matters. And we can't rely on a small pool of agents or even a large pool of agents, because I think over the next year, we're going to see a lot of them let their license just go off into the sunset.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, good point. So change the focus a little bit. If you haven't been focusing on direct to consumer marketing, definitely time to start ramping up that side of your game.
Yeah. Commercial real estate, still calling it. Every bit of worth the effort to get into commercial inspections. And just as a reminder, I get asked this a lot after the podcast we did earlier this year on commercial inspections. I'm just going to review that real quick. In my opinion, the best way to do it is have an LLC, name it whatever you want. Then do a DBA for that LLC for a home inspection company, and a DBA under that LLC for commercial inspections, and keep them dissimilar enough. So you can have ABC Home Inspections, but then your commercial company be called Highline Commercial Building Inspections, whatever you want to call it. I'm just making up names. And have it be different enough. There's something called citation confusion, or it's more of an internal term. Basically, if you have 2 companies named similarly, Google just lumps them all together, and it creates
the same entity. Yeah,
it creates problems. So if you're ABC Home Inspections and your ABC Commercial Inspections, you're going to get all those things mixed up in search results, and it's going to actually cost you conversions.
Yeah, good point.
But that's the way I recommend it personally, because I like to have one big insurance policy for both. Now, if you are running hot and heavy in commercial, completely separated, do a completely different LLC. But I have had so many guys call me since those podcasts and say, Ian, I want to just add a web page to my home inspection website that I do commercial inspections, but I want to have it work completely as well as having a completely separate website and brand. And they ask me so many different ways, and it all leads to the same answer. I'm like, you can do that, but you're just going to lose conversions. So
that makes
there's
sense.
my public service announcement.
Yeah, good advice.
Something I wanted to get your opinion on. This is a sensitive subject, but the lawsuit with Spectora, Report Host versus Spectora, has come back super ugly. Super ugly. Way uglier. It's like it fell into a vat of poo and acid and then came back and started snarling at you. It's gotten bad, right?
Yeah, I like you said, sensitive subject, but I think we, as a software company, we're interested in it, because we're concerned about precedents that anything like this sets in the industry. And I think any one of our listeners, in some way, form, or another, are interested in the topic, because you don't want anybody calling you up and potentially suing legal or threatening legal action because of narratives that you're using in your reports. So yeah, I don't know all the details of, and I'm not a legal expert, but the fact that these guys are coming back again, it's not you don't come back again unless you got something, and it's a very quick succession. So it's concerning. I'm not sure, what the Spectora guys are, how they're viewing it, or what the technical details are of everything. But yeah, I'm just hope that it ends up in a place where it's good for the industry, because if it heads in a bad place, it could be a bad thing for a lot of people in the home inspection industry.
Yeah, so if you're just finding out about this, we did a podcast on the lawsuit that Report Host did, and basically some of it is Report Host said that Spectora took their comments and gave them to their users instead, and that Spectora basically had what was called a Report Host template or something like that. We're not legal experts, but they settled. Nick Gromyko did a podcast with us and Nathan Thornberry. And Nick tried to do an injunction and all that stuff because it was a bad precedent for the inspection industry, which is where we have a problem with it. Instead of fighting it, they said, okay, here's a bunch of money and we'll take down all those reports and all that other stuff. And users were upset about it. Individual home inspectors were being contacted by Report Hosts and or their attorneys. I don't know how that worked out. From what I was told, at least one or two users ended up paying money. So can you imagine just being some dude out there saying, just as a random example, I don't know if this is one of their comments or not, but GFCI was not functional at time of inspection. And then all of a sudden you get a demand letter for $7,000 saying that you've been using their comment.
Yeah. And
Nick actually went back and found that most of their comments came from Internashi. Kenton Shepard wrote them.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, because that's why Nick is so interested in it, because that's intellectual property that Internachi owns. So nobody can just take that and copyright it, and now it's theirs, and you can sue people for it. So that's why Nick is engaged. But now that example you just gave there, this is an interesting example, because I guess one of the arguments being made is that it was made out that simple narratives like that is what Report Host was concerned about. More generic narratives, because that's what was being flagged, I guess, like short statements like that anybody can come up with. But I guess what they're taking issue with is longer, more complex narratives that are clearly being used. It's like one thing to accidentally, in the scope of being a home inspector, you can have a few single sentence things that you write as narratives, and you take a group of 10 inspectors and probably half of them wrote it almost word for word. Others will maybe have a slightly different approach, but generally they're going to be pretty much the same. So copywriting terms like that, there's no point, right? You can't do that. That won't hold up in a court of law. But I guess the point that's being made now with this next write at it is that there are much more extensive, more research, elaborate narratives that, if you put 10 inspectors in the room and tell them to write a paragraph on the topic, not one of them is going to come up with the same thing. But now they're seeing it spread across hundreds or however many reports, that they found to be violations. So I think that's what casts an interesting light on it, because it seems to maybe not be as frivolous as what it was originally being made to be. Now, I don't know the truth of that, but that's why Report Host is back at the table. They're saying it wasn't about all those little one-sentence narratives. There's larger pieces of work that we've been working at, and that's what we want to protect. So how it shakes out, I don't know. I've never seen Report Host narratives, so I have no idea what they look like. But that's the claim. So
yeah, and we don't know if Internashi actually owns them. That's what Nick says. That's
between Nick and Kenton and Report Host. We have no idea.
Yeah, and they went on record as saying it. So Nick doesn't say stuff willy-nilly like that. But I will say there's actually more to why they came back. So you can actually go online. What's that website be on if you type in Report Host and Spectora? Is it Justia or something like that? Where you can actually read.
I think so.
You can actually read the court documents.
Nick posted it on the Internachi forum. That's where I did most of my reading on that was on theirs. So yeah.
So you can find it on the Internachi forum. You can actually read it. Most of it's legal mumbo jumbo, but they came back too because they said, "Listen, we settled in good faith," and they said that Spectora basically didn't live up to parts of the settlement. Like they said that Spectora was supposed to say things in a different way, and instead Spectora presented it a different way than they were expecting, or they thought was in the spirit of or in writing of what they were supposed to do. And then there were some other things that they claimed that Spectora was supposed to do that they didn't. So they came back, and they came back even harder. And I'm no attorney, but I'm reading the document. I'm like, dude, that's a strong argument they've made.
Mm.
And it looks like they got a new law firm, and these guys are no joke.
Mm.
Like they're not the attorney down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really anxious to see how this turns out.
Mm.
I hope Spectora doesn't roll over like they did before and just I'm going to say it. I love the Wagstaffs. They're great guys, but they rolled over and basically stuck it to us as an industry.
Yeah. And I think that's why I said what I did at the beginning, is I just hope whatever happens, how this thing shakes out, that it shakes out where, because ultimately, the home inspector using a software platform, all you're really interested in, you just want to do your job. You want to make your money, you want to feed your family, you want to do a good job, have a good reputation, you want to deliver a good report, and you want to walk away from that job and have confidence that you did the best thing you could do, deliver the best quality, right? That's what we all after. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be worried about what content is being used in your report, where that came from. If I word it like this, it sounds too much like that. And I mean, who can do your job, when that is the case? So it sets the result here will have an impact on the industry as a whole. And at the end of the day, I'm not an inspector, but I know all the inspectors just want to inspect. You just want to get out there and do your job. And stuff like this is not good for the guy in the street trying to do his job.
So here's the reality of it too. We could say, well, I'm glad I use any other software. I don't use Spectora, I don't use Report Host, I don't use this or that. You could still get a phone call from this. Have you ever had somebody share a comment with you? He's like, well, I've written all my comments. Okay, well, like Beon just said, did you write a comment and it sounds eerily like a Report Host comment? Or eerily like, because it's going to happen. I've written thousands of comments. You don't think that by the time I'm done writing a comment that somehow me and some home inspector in Arkansas or Australia all of a sudden had the same thought to word it the same way?
Mm-hmm.
So now what that does is it opens it up for not only Report Host, but for anybody else, because now there would be a precedence to call us and say, hey, I saw your sample report online. I use one of these free online tools that will do a word search of the entire internet,
Mm-hmm.
and come back. It's called a harvester. Come back and it'll tell me, hey, your report that somebody put online or you put online has a phrase that goes into one of my reports.
Mm-hmm.
Give me 10 grand.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Have fun paying them.
Right.
That's what this does.
Right. Or go to court and we go to trial. I mean, who's got money for that? So
Only one who wins are attorneys.
No, exactly. So, and it's a very hot topic just overall right now, because the whole rise of AI with like Chat GPT and conversational AI, all this kind of stuff. That's where a lot of authors, famous authors, are going back and saying, yeah, I asked Chat GPT to write something in the style of, me, and this is what it came out with. And that paragraph is almost verbatim like my work, that I published in this book. So who's going to get into trouble there? Already there's a lot of people suing ChatGPT. But if you're the person who has used ChatGPT and you take that content that was, styled according to whatever author, you put that on your blog or your website, guess who's going to get sued? Mm-hmm. You are, and you go, yeah, but I got it from ChatGPT. Yeah, well, where did they get it from? So I think it is a much bigger topic, and this is why this is an interesting time for intellectual property law, because nobody knows where the line is at the moment. It's gotten fuzzy, but they'll be looking to establish case precedent. Obviously, maybe not for a smaller, I call it a smaller case like this that's done in I think it is a federal court, but it's like, just a state jurisdiction. But you're going to see cases like this bubbling up to Supreme Court level, and they're going to start setting precedents for how these things are going to be handled. Because if I wrote something and ChatGPT is regurgitating it and somebody else is using it, I'm losing revenue. My work's being used, and that's something I should be able to protect. But where's the line? When can I say it's actually my work or when does it become a product of someone else? It's too heavily modified. And that's where the law is going to have to try and decide, I guess.
And there's no simple way to go about it, because that's like, I remember one time somebody copied one of our websites and they said the CSS is not within 12% or something silly like that. And I'm like, so you changed the red color around slightly. That's all you're saying. And I'm like, don't do that.
Right.
And so they, they're like, fine, you got us. But when you kind of get down to it, it's at what point is it different enough?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a red painting and you make it purple, but it's the exact same, except it's purple, is that different enough?
Right.
If it's done in the style of too close to a particular work or too close to, it's like, there's no way to draw a clear line. So that's going to create a large load for cases. And that's the problem. It's going to create a lot of case law and a lot of precedent to bring things to court. And that's where the demand letters get hard for home inspectors. Just some guy, we make X amount of dollars per year, feeding their family, single inspector. You get a demand letter and the attorney's like, man, it's going to cost us $40,000 to fight this. Just pay the $8,000.
Right.
And then you have to deal with that once every 5 years because now you wrote another comment that sounds like somebody else's comment.
Right.
It's like,
right. Yeah. And the more times they get paid, the more it sets precedent, and even if it's not like an official legal precedent, because when you settle a case, it isn't entered into case law as a precedent or anything like that. But even among a community, like the home inspectors, if I'm in a room again with 10 home inspectors and 6 of them have just settled and paid the guy to get them off their back, what am I going to do? Stand up and say, no, I'm going to fight this? Forget it, So that's where I really hope this is going to go a direction where we can have a good solid precedent set in the industry. We can put this thing to bed and be done with it.
You know what I think is going to be interesting law precedents? Remember years ago when Getty Images went on a campaign to sue people that were using their images without licenses? And they were doing large demand letters, anywhere from a couple grand to tens of thousands of dollars or more. And I remember a couple of cases went to court, but ultimately people just ended up paying it. They got paid so much money. And the defense was always, I don't owe you 10 grand or whatever the amount was. I owe you for the price of the image. It's like, I took a sandwich from the sandwich shop. I don't owe you 10 grand for the sandwich. I owe you for the price of the sandwich. That didn't hold up very well. Parts of it did. But look up one case in particular if anybody's interested in as a dork like me. There was one case, I think it was a bicycle shop, and that set a lot of precedent. But all that did was embolden Getty Images to send out more demand letters. They made a mint on that. I think they were hoping people would take their images because they just used a harvester. At the time, the harvester was expensive. It was 13, 15 years ago. But now you can get them free online. Just once you hit your limit, you go to the next one. So not hard for people to start sending us demand letters and stuff like that. Yeah. But this is basically an inspection news episode. I guess that's what we'll call this.
I guess so. We've gone from the market to like case law with intellectual property.
Well, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
And when it comes to any kind of news in the inspection industry, it's all going to be related to what's going on in real estate. And this case has been one that's been following us around for a couple of years, and it's already caused problems.
Yeah.
Think of all the users right now, all the people who have just written reports doing their job that have paid thousands of dollars or have otherwise, had their reports taken down. And, I think they were supplementally given a PDF version of their report. Man, that stinks.
Like that. Yeah. No, yeah. I tell you, Ian, and that's why like you say, that's why we've been following it very closely, because we have our user base. We want to make sure that we're doing things right and that one's not exposed, so we just don't want to get to a point where you are doing everything right and you can still have a target on your back just because somebody feels like it.
Yeah.
That's a situation we want to avoid.
Yeah. Well, Bjorn, thank you for being on today. It's always great to have you on, talk about poison ivy treatments.
Well, hopefully everybody feels a little more soothed and the swelling has subsided.
Yeah. This feels like a podcast we do with David.
No, then we wouldn't be able to air it. So at least this way it can get out there.
Yeah. Well, either way, thank you for being on. Be on. Everybody listening for our next episode, and we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. Have a good one.
You too.